Okay. So what we thought we'd do in this session is just give you an update on what's going on with the Rules Committee, and then open it up for discussion about perhaps what's going on in the regions, whether you've seen region rules changes that you've liked, whether you've seen region rules that you've disliked, because as you may or may not know, the regions, there are a range of acceptable variations that the regions engage in because the regions are autonomous. And so sometimes what happens is that folks try things out in the region, they work really well, and then we bring them to the national tournament. Or at least the rules committee considers taking them to the national tournament. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what went well or what didn't go well at the region. So I would say in terms of updates on the rules committee, the first thing that I think is sort of big and wonderful is that we have now increased the number of people on the rules committee. And what's great about this is that it's more representative of perspectives throughout the country and just increases the quality, I think, of the conversation. So as a result, though, our discussion has been delayed. Discussions of the rules charges usually take place in June or July, but this time we were waiting for people to accept or reject invitations to join the committee. And so it looks like our discussions are going to take place in August. So we now have 10 people on the rules committee, which is fantastic. So the rules committee, right now we're working on a charter for the rules committee to be more explicit about what the rules committee, the role of the rules committee is. So that's something that we're working on right now. And then the charges that we're discussing this year are the following. We're going to discuss some potential changes to the virtual region eligibility requirements. So right now, maybe some folks that have been really involved in the virtual tournament can speak to why this is necessary. But my understanding is that there are just too many teams signing up for the virtual region. Michael, you want to say something about that?
Actually, might pass that on to John, who ran.
John? Yeah, and Richard's here too, that
Yeah.
he could potentially say something. But yeah, John.
Yeah, Richard and I have been running it the past couple of years, and I think the first year we did it, we had 12 teams, and then last year it exploded. And the issue really was that the way that it exploded was not by single teams from schools that were unable to get to a geographic region, but third teams mainly who were shut out of the Northeast, but also other regions. So just a lot of second and third teams from large schools. And so it became very, well, it was fine. We managed it, but it was a little unwieldy. It also gets you wonky results because if you have all of the teams that are a third or second team are not actually using the virtual as a qualifier. It's just an opportunity to compete. And so you might have those teams maybe finish first through fifth place, and then you have the sixth place team as your first qualifier. And so you get some really weird results that are not ideal when we have that level of second and third teams coming into the virtual. So it seems like it would be good to find a different way of setting up the criteria for qualifying in.
And I think really thinking about giving priority to those schools that just have one team that want to get in and participate to be able to qualify. And so that's something that the rules committee is working on. And so we want to make sure that obviously we are incorporating or enabling as many students as possible to be able to participate. But we also have to keep in mind that, you know, to have a third team shut out, a single team that's trying to qualify is relatively problematic. And so that needs to be worked out as we move forward.
And so this is relevant to something that we were talking about yesterday when we were talking about what to do with those extra teams that aren't able to compete in the region that arise out of ethics poll classes. And so because it's become so large, it looks unlikely that that's going to be the answer, that the virtual bowl is going to be the answer. It's a lot of work to run these polls, so the virtual bowl, and it's a big task to find judges and things like that too. So okay, so then Another thing that the Rules Committee is going to be tasked with is developing national registration dates that are uniform. Is that right, John? You want to, John, would you say something more about that as well?
Yeah, and really, Kristen was very helpful bringing this to our attention because as people I think know, we've gone back and forth over the years about whether registrations would go through API and then regions would get reimbursed. They'd go through the regions. You'd have to do both. And so I think it's gone very smoothly with things going through API. Years ago when we did that, the regions had a problem because it took forever to get reimbursed from API. And under Kristen, that's been way better. And everything happens much smoothly, but it's a very complicated process when people go register. All of the registration deadlines are different. So trying to find a uniform registration date is going to be really helpful. And we, of course, realize that there's pretty big differences even when schools start back up. So we know it's not easy, but the hope is that will make things easier really on all schools. It's not just an API issue, right, in terms of the administrative headache, but if you're trying to register a team in 2 different regions and, you don't realize, oh, I was kind of thinking mostly of this region and I went to make sure didn't miss that deadline, but I missed the other deadline, that kind of thing can be very complicated. So hopefully this will make things easier for everybody.
Thanks, John. Okay, and then the last one is we're going to be talking about term limits for the Rules Committee, or at least a sort of the general idea that you've served. The proposal is something like you've served on the Rules Committee for 6 years, and then we think about potentially replacing you if there are people who want to fill the position. That's a tough one because they're not always people willing to volunteer. So for these various committees, so we're trying to kind of walk the line between, on the one hand, having things staffed, and on the other hand, having new voices. And maybe this is a good time to say that we're always looking for new participants in leadership. And so if you'd like to be on one of our committees, please let us know. Okay, so we could open it up for discussion now. If you have any thoughts on any of the rules change, we don't have a lot of rules changes we're considering, but if you have any thoughts on those rules changes we just mentioned, we'd love to hear them. And we'd also love to hear about rules in your region, as I mentioned, that you like or you dislike or think are going well or not well.
I'm also interested because I know that there's been a number of people that have presented variations of what we currently do in the regions. And I'd definitely be interested to hear from some of those people, if they're online, about some of the different ideas that they have in terms of how we might be able to tweak it in certain ways in the different regions to kind of experiment.
Yeah.
Definitely would be interested in anybody that has any of those types of ideas. And then I also think it's a good opportunity to really open it up for those of you who might suggest certain types of rule tweaks that we might take into consideration, or we can have the Rules Committee take into consideration. One of the things that we're always trying to do, especially with the Rules Committee, is make sure that the poll runs smoothly, that it runs fairly, that it's transparent, that everybody understands what exactly the rules are. But again, like all things, as it expands and grows, right, we've always had to do little tweaks here and there to make sure that the rules represent really what the bowl is doing.
Yeah, that's great. We have a comment in the chat, or a question in the chat from Greg Wright that says, could we limit the number of regions a school competes in? For example, a school can compete in 2 in-person bowls, but if you choose to compete in the virtual bowl, that's your only shot. I think it's already a rule that you can only use 1 region as your qualifier. Greg, were you thinking that there should be a rule that says that even as a non-qualifier, there should be a limit to the number of regions a school competes in? I don't know if Greg's able to. He said he was having issues with audio.
Okay.
Oh, you got it, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm thinking that if we're having with the virtual bowl, how it's exploded with second and third teams from a particular school that's competed already in a particular region, is there a way that we can limit that so that if school X competes in the Northeast, in person, that the virtual bowl would only be for those teams that can't compete in a region. Either they can't get
Hmm.
into the region, or maybe there's some sort of financial reason why they can't travel to an in-person bowl. But I'm wondering if there's a way to limit the bowl hopping where, okay, I'm going to travel to the Wasatch Regional, I'm going to go to the Rocky Mountain Regional, I'm
Mhm.
going to do the 2-year bowl, plus I'm going to do the virtual. Seems like the virtual should be just for those teams that can't get into a region or financially go to a region. So if school X is going to field a team in the regional bowl, that means you're also, the reason why you're doing that is because you can't compete in a region. That would limit, the second and third teams.
Well, Rachel, do you mind if I clarify
do.
one thing?
Yeah, please do.
So the rule now, so Greg, I think what you're bringing up is exactly what's sort of on the table for the rules committee, but the rule now is that you can't field the same team of students in the virtual and a geographic bowl. So the only teams that are coming are, okay, I'm Harvard and I have 3 separate teams of students. The first 2 teams were able to participate in geographic regions, and we're sending a third team of completely new, different students to the virtual. But I do think that's over the top and needs to be fixed. And some of you have realized there are teams that are legitimately they're participating in 4 regions. I think it used to be the case that when people are in multiple regions, it was like 2 regions. They would go, I might go to the Central States and the Upper Midwest. And now you see University of Chicago's in like the Texas, the Southeast, the Upper Midwest, the this, the that. If you're from University of Chicago, much love to you. You're wonderful people, but you're also very well financed, apparently. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And this is at the heart of the rule change too, I think, is should we limit further the schools that can compete in the virtual? Mark.
So, sorry. I want to
no,
ask
please.
the question again then. So, the virtual team has to be a completely different set of students than the one that goes to the geographic bowl.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, perfect.
Mark?
Hi, I was just wondering, and this is connected to the deadline for registration. I wonder if there's a way to structure registration so that with the presumption that the virtual bowl is primarily for teams that are not able for some reason to get into their regions. Maybe it's financial, or they just miss, they miss the deadline or whatever. If the registration for the regional, and this is going to blow John's idea out of the water in terms of a uniform registration date, but if the virtual's registration date is sometime relatively soon after, say, the registration for the regional bowls, then teams that can't get into their region or can't travel to them could register. But then once those needs are met, then some arbitrary limit to the number of teams in the virtual could be filled out by these other teams. So you're trying.
Mind if I respond quickly? Yeah.
Well, I just, if I'm clear about what I'm saying, you want to guarantee that people that can't participate in regional have a place to participate.
Right.
And then only after that, let's say you say 16 teams is the most we can do at a regional. And I'm not saying that's, or at the virtual, and I'm not saying that's what it should be. But let's say 16 teams is our limit, and we've got 14 teams that can't get into their regional for whatever reason. You got 2 slots open. That becomes available to whoever wants to use it. I don't know.
There's a related issue that came up last year, I think, with Princeton, and I can't remember this exactly, but the way I think to address that, Mark, is that a team would actually have to register for the virtual sort of as a just in case, and then remove themselves if they get in off a waiting list, let's say to the geographic region, rather than sitting on the waiting list for the geographic region and then later coming into the virtual bowl. And so Princeton was in a situation last year where they thought by being on the waiting list, they sort of would automatically be considered as as being able to qualify. And that wasn't the case. So that's another aspect of that rule that will need clarified, is like, where do you need to be registered by which date in order to be considered to able to qualify at all? All right, I'll shut up because there's lots.
John, there's and Mark, there's a further complicating issue, right? And that is the registration date is tied to the census date. So, 1 week prior to the first bowl, we take a census of where folks are registered, and it's on the basis of that census, the bids to nationals are allocated. So you really can't have a date for the regional bowl that's later, or sorry, the virtual bowl that's later than all the others, and include them in that calculus, unless you're compromising the others by having their registration date earlier. So it seems like there should be a sort of, date that, in my opinion, is best 10 days before the first regional in a given year. That's the registration date for everybody. Most regions that fill up know well in advance of that, right? And so someone can be on a waiting list for, say the Northeast Regional up to maybe 2 weeks before the competition, sign up for the virtual bowl. And if they don't get in by that time, then because they're frozen out, they're in the virtual bowl. And then if something opens up at the other regional, and it's, after that census date, they shouldn't be allowed to move, because that changes the odds that every team in both of those competitions face to earn a bid, right? If it turns out that we have roughly 1 bid for every 5 schools, and your regional has 20 and you've got 4 bids, and some teams hop over to another region at the last minute, we've awarded you 4 bids, and now there are 18 qualifying schools. So I don't know that there's enough of a practical problem to be solved with teams on waiting lists hoping to get in regions near those, that isn't solved by just having them be in the virtual bowl at the point they're frozen out, or they can move around well in advance of the census date, 2 or 3 days or some such.
I think it'd be wise to have the folks that have been running the virtual bowl come and talk to the rules committee. Because I think it would just be ridiculous for us to make any sorts of decisions or make any sort of recommendations to the board without having all the context.
And to kind of piggyback on that, I think that Alex Richardson is the new regional rep should be looped into those conversations as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me ask. So Taz, I know I saw you have your hand up, and I want to get to you. Is your comment or question about this particular issue?
Yes, it's about the virtual bowl.
Okay, please.
So I was under the assumption that teams that were participating in the virtual ethics bowl were ones that could not regionally or financially make it into some of the other existing geographical bowls. But I'm understanding that's not right, or it's not in place.
It includes those, and then up till now, we've also included others, right? If there's a third team at a school that wants to come to the virtual bowl as a non-qualifier, because we've had the ability to accommodate them, we've allowed for that. Last year, we had so many of those requests that it made it tough to put the bowl on. This year, with a new virtual region that's kind of an official region with board representation in place, the resources may be very different. I'm assuming Alex has a network from his days with the high school bowl of 1 million judges and lots of bandwidth, and so who knows to accommodate. But I know what John and I couldn't accommodate, which is the number of teams we had last year. Sorry, Alex.
Well, I will just say that for the virtual regional to be a quality event that is a decent and consistent pedagogical experience for everyone, we should dispense with the notion that it is infinitely scalable.
Yeah. Greg.
It can't play that role in perpetuity.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
right.
exactly correct.
The experience we've had, right? That we got to a point where it was really unmanageable.
Greg.
Yeah, if the goal is to ensure I mean, I understand that what I was trying to offer up would limit the amount of student participation. But it does seem to me that by allowing so many second and third teams, that we're limiting potentially the participation of schools who can't make it to a regional. So if Harvard, for example, can make it to the Northeast Regional, they don't really need to be in the virtual regional. So I understand the difficulty there. And I'm just wondering if we can just do away with second and third teams to ensure that the schools who can only field one team can make it in. I know what the 2-year bowl does is we get all the teams registered, and then if we need a second or third team, a school wants to submit one or participate, then we'll fill in the spots that we have afterwards. I don't know if you use a lottery system or first come, first serve, but it would be a shame if there are schools who want to participate in the virtual bowl, because that's the only way that they could if somehow they were to be squeezed out.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. John, do you have a?
Well, just that, I think that's basically the proposal in front of the
Yeah.
committee, because, and we never, to be clear, we never had to squeeze those schools out. But I think we were trying to basically just continue to grow and expose more and more students to the bowl. But Iris put something in the chat that I think is right, that you can always run virtual scrimmages. But I think, and in my response to Iris, I was like, well, then we're organizing yet another event, but we don't need to do that. We could just say, look, here's some resources on the APPE website about how to contact people about making your own virtual scrimmages.
Yeah.
And so if you want to have a bowl between the third teams at a bunch of the more highly funded schools with large teams, great, go get it. And that's how you can continue to build your teams, but we don't need to do it through a formal regional opportunity.
Yeah, that came up in the Ethics Bowl in the classroom session too, because if you have enough students enrolled in your Ethics Bowl course, you want them all to be participating. And one proposal that came up was just to for those of us who have an Ethics Bowl class, to create a little scrimmage that's not affiliated with any particular region. But then we could all work together on getting judges and whatnot. Okay. So are there thoughts about any of the other proposed rule changes, if you can remember them at this point? Or do you have thoughts about rules and policies that have worked well or not worked well at the regions in which you participate? Or do you just have questions about rules? Mark?
Just about the term limits for rules committee members, I think that's a good idea. And I think you can word, but I also am attentive to your comment about there's not always volunteers waiting in the wings to serve. So you don't want to deprive yourself of committee members with a hard limit. So I think it could be under typical circumstances, there's a 6-year term limit. But that you want to leave the committee chair with the flexibility to be able to extend someone's term limit if in fact there are nobody to take the place, right?
I think,
so you just like to word it to get both things at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. And you also want to make sure that the people who are on the rules committee are have a lot of background with it. Matthew, please.
Actually, I just wanted. And that's actually why I want to chime in. I completely support some kind of term limit or some sort of plan of rolling people off. I just looked it up to see how long it had been. It's been longer than I thought. I've now been on the rules committee for 9 years.
Well, thank you for your service.
Yeah. And so you assured me that I had to check with you to make sure I was still there because I knew there were new members. So at the end of this, that'll essentially be 10 years. I'm not sure I need to be on that anymore. It's probably time for some other grumpy person to be on there complaining about the rules. So, yeah, I mean, I think we ought to be thinking about that, and maybe you move on to other committees. Like maybe I should focus on the council as opposed to the rules committee. And so I completely support that. But of course, you're all right. It's going to take more volunteers.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we're working on right now is a charter that really defines all of the different committees that we have. So it's something that we need to think about in terms of all the different ethics bowl committees. We've done this kind of at an ad hoc level for a long time, and we're getting so large and there's so many more people. And this year is the first year that we've had, you know, such an onslaught of people that are actually volunteering, which was amazing. Right. In past years, it's been kind of hard trying to figure out like, okay, do you have the time? Would you like to do it? So as we're growing, we need to get much more formalized. And so absolutely, we need to make sure that we work out the charters that, you know, for each one of these committees. So, you know, we have a very clear, transparent process on how all of this actually works.
I think also, you know, this is a good place to pitch. If you would like to be on a committee, please let us know. We've got committees that need more members. In particular, we really need some participants in the diversity committee. So if you're interested in being on the diversity committee, please, I'll put my email in the chat. Or you could contact Michael. Anyway, Gisela, please.
Hi. So I was just thinking maybe it should be like you guys were saying with the committee, a little more formalized, whereby every 4 years or whatever, we have some sort of elections. People put themselves up to, and it's a sort of very informal, maybe elections, but it could be something like that where people could say, hey, every 4 years, there's kind of like this thing, and people who are on the committee could say, hey, I am still interested in serving another 4 years. And then the other people might say, or I'm not interested in serving another 4 years. Maybe somebody else wants to take this position. It could be a little collegial like that, but it could be like a more formalized process every certain amount of years. It could be every, 2, 4, whatever you want to make it, but it would make it a little easier to have new people say, I want to do this, because if you see that the position is filled, you never think about, oh, I want to do this. Whereas if the position goes up for renewal or whatever you want to call it every 4 years or 2 years or whatever, people will come up and say, oh, I want to do that. And then you can figure out some methodology that's best for this particular group to make that happen. I think it might serve it well to have like a more formalized little process where new people feel confident to say, I can do this. And the old people might feel confident to say, I don't want to do this anymore, really.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Giselle. I jotted down some of those ideas. I really appreciate that. Great. We're working some of those things out. So terrific. Thanks for the feedback. Okay, so people be watching the chat. There's some good ideas, some volunteers. Woo! Good. Other thoughts? Oh, okay, we're done in 2 minutes. All right. Didn't that just make it a 15 or a half hour long meeting?
Well, let me jump in really quick. So one of the things that if anybody has any ideas of different formats or different ways to tweak it. So one of the things that we do is we oftentimes allow regions to do, minor variations and experiments. So I'm curious if there's any ideas that are out there, so that you might want to share with the rest of us.
Okay, someone said, and I think Brecken said this more than once in the chat, what qualifies one to be on a committee? What are you looking for in choosing members? I mean, it would be nice if you had some experience with the ethics bowl, right? But we're really, the main thing we're looking for in committee members is just people who are, love the bowl and willing to volunteer. There's a lot of great volunteer work to be done. And where you get placed could have something to do with how much experience you have and what kind of experience. So don't be shy about volunteering if you want to volunteer. We'd love to have you. And Kristen's got a great idea in the chat about putting together a Google sign-up sheet for scrimmages and putting it on the Appy webpage. I know I would be totally into that. That would be a good way. I mean, again, connecting it back up with our ethics bowl in the classroom discussion, that would be a really great way of getting students who don't get put on the team that's competing at the regional to have some experience. John.
Well, just I guess one thought to piggyback on what you just said, Rachel, is that it'd also be nice to do. I think we tend to think of scrimmages as getting ready for the regionals, but one thing that we often talk about, right, is like what happens to all the people that don't qualify to the nationals. Might be a nice way to keep teams involved. You know, teams often break up if they don't qualify, but if they did know, oh, there's a series of virtual scrimmages we could do in the spring, that might be kind of a nice opportunity, and we could make those somewhat formal or leave them completely informal and just leave them scrimmages, which would be a cool idea. The other point I was just going to make is in response to what's the criteria for being on the committees is I think on the Appy website, I think I'm right about this, that there's a page under Ethics Bowl for committees, and there are brief descriptions about the qualifications for various committees. Because I think for instance, I think the rules committee, there is like some requirement about coaching experience or other
It is,
involvement.
it's 5 years.
But for most, there's no
That's right.
requirement.
Thanks for that, John. Yeah. Yeah, that's terrific. Ah, John disappeared. But his hand's still up. His hand didn't disappear. Okay.
Housekeeping was knocking, sorry.
Oh, we're getting volunteers in the chat. I love this. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so terrific ideas in the chat. Two things I want to highlight that people have been saying. One option is to have like a later in the season kind of event, either for student, like, so say fall semester, the teams that are interested in scrimmaging could extend the season. Because I know one concern people were raising is like, what do you do in the rest of the time? If your regional competition is in early November, but the semester doesn't end until mid-December, what do you do with all the rest of that time? Well, one thing is you could prepare for another event that's just like a scrimmage that folks are running. But then I saw Justin said, yes, something to do in the spring. I think that's a great idea too. So you've got a great set of cases in the national cases, and only the teams that qualify are working on them. It'd be really fun for schools that want to put teams together just to have a scrimmage to work on those cases and get together and do it. That's great. Oh, another thing that I'll just mention, as Richard's pointing out, one event that folks might want to do in the spring if they're looking for something is an unaffiliated event, but is the Bioethics Bowl. We've got Marcia McKellian here who's involved with that.
And I'm hosting this year.
Yeah, and Richard's hosting this year along with Michael Popich at Westminster.
The Bioethics Bowl has actually gotten quite large and fills up very quickly as well.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, yeah, and of course, Michael is involved with that every year. Trying to keep up with the chat a little bit here.
John, do you see the message from Justin Stone? Junior college getting a team ready in the fall is brutal. Most likely the team will be mostly freshmen and 2 years at most. Do you want to say something about that, considering your background?
Yeah, well, one side note is that a couple of us had been talking about in one of the breakout sessions at the end of the day, we might have a session just for 2-year issues, so we can maybe talk more about this then as well. But Greg knows this, is that when the 2-year championship started, we actually experimented with doing it in the spring. One year we actually had it on the same weekend as the IEB. It was Thursday, and then the IEB championship was Sunday. So we moved it to make it a qualifying regional, but you know, your comment sort of reopens that question and makes it interesting. Either way, I think it'd be really great for 2-year colleges to try to do something amongst ourselves in the spring. Now, obviously, it would have to be separate from a qualifying event for the IEB, but Greg, I'd be excited about talking about that with the other 2-year folks. And now I have to plug in my computer.
Happy. Other thoughts about rules? It's kind of this has been a great discussion, but I understand is one of the drier of the topics, so. More
Can
informal.
I,
Yeah, Greg,
sorry, I'm raising my hand. I'm doing
Oh.
this on my phone now, so.
your real hand. Okay, please.
Yeah, so the idea of two spring bowls is something that's come up in the past. One bowl of the IEB for, those who have qualified, but then a second bowl that could be done virtually for teams that didn't qualify.
Mhm.
They're a really great idea, but there are some pretty serious logistical questions that would have to be answered. And then there's also an issue of, dare I say, ethics bowl burnout that,
What is
that,
that?
that, that comes in the spring.
Yeah.
And but I think as the organization and the competition and the number of teams grows, then there's more people who can volunteer to help out with the spring bowl.
I think so too. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be affiliated with IEB, right? I mean, it could just be something that individual coaches put together. Right. Yeah, no, I know, Greg. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I want my team to qualify or not. Because on the one hand, it's great. On the other hand, it's exhausting. So I hear you. Yeah. There are a lot of logistical problems. And I think one thing we can't do is task ethics bowl leadership with putting together yet another bowl. It would have to be done independently, I think. Because it just is so much work.
Yeah, grassroots.
And judges, right? We want to, I mean, one issue is that we want to make sure that the judges are, we've got enough judges. Finding judges is always an issue. So we want to make sure we have enough judges for the official bowls. But maybe, if you're doing something more informal, maybe you can have coaches serve as judges or whatever. Okay, other thoughts? Well, I think some terrific stuff came out of this discussion, and I've taken some notes, so I appreciate you all. If there, Michael, anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. We can just take a few minute extra break if you want.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Thanks everyone, and thanks in particular for those who volunteered in the chat.
So we'll see you guys back at 11:15 Pacific and then 2:15 Eastern, and yeah, we'll see you then.